So anyway, I want to make a video today about a difficult passage from the Old Testament. I've already talked in the past about 1 Samuel chapter 15. That's the one where God commands his people, the Israelites, to slaughter men, women, children, infants, and all the animals of the tribe of the Amalekites. So anyway, we're not going to talk about that one today. We're going to talk about another passage that is just as difficult, if not more so. One of those passages that I think many Christians may not even know about because they haven't read the Bible in its entirety. And, I have to, take responsibility for the fact that I have read the Bible in its entirety, even as a Christian, but passages like the one I'm about to read to you didn't actually break my faith, which just shows you how deeply Christianity sometimes can get its claws into the mind, because what I'm about to read to you is frankly horrific. This is 2 Kings chapter 2, and I'm going to draw attention to verses 23 to 25, although I want to put it in context for you. The prophet Elijah is moving from place to place, and he's being followed by Elisha. Elijah is Elisha's master. Elisha knows that Elijah is going to be taken from him. God is going to take him up into heaven. And he makes a last request of Elijah. And he says, let me see if I can find it in verse 9. When they had crossed, Elijah said to Elisha, "Tell me, what can I do for you before I am taken from you?" "Let me inherit a double portion of your spirit," Elisha replied. It's kind of cryptic what that actually means, but I think given what happens next, Elisha is essentially wanting to continue the work of Elijah, to be a prophet like Elijah, to have Elijah's power. And then Elijah is taken. As they were walking along together, suddenly a chariot of fire and horses appeared and separated the two of them, and Elijah went up to heaven in a whirlwind. So Elisha was left behind. So he's heading home. And in verse 23 we read this. From there, Elisha went up to Bethel. As he was walking along the road, some boys came out of the town and jeered at him. "Get out of here, Baldy," they said. "Get out of here, Baldy." He turned around, looked at them, and called down a curse on them in the name of the Lord. Then 2 bears came out of the woods and mauled 42 of the boys. And he went on to Mount Carmel, and from there returned to Samaria. So let's be clear here. What problem do I see with this? Well, the problem is that God killed 42 youths, 42 boys, because he was requested to do so by Elisha, his prophet, his servant. So, we know why it happened. It wasn't because the boys were mocking God, right? It wasn't because of blasphemy. It wasn't even God that was affronted. It was specifically Elisha, right? If Elisha hadn't called down the curse, those boys wouldn't have died. They died because he cursed them, right? It's so strange, isn't it, even to think about curses in terms of the people of God? In the modern day, when people think of curses, you very rarely think of a Christian speaking a curse against someone. It's usually Christians being afraid that there are Satanists throwing curses and witches throwing curses, but here we have a man of God throwing a curse. Although I have to say, it's not unheard of that a Christian throws a curse. It has happened to me a couple of times where I have been cursed by a Christian or two. If you want to look back in my videos, there's one with the title, I Curse You Sloan, where I kind of make fun of the whole thing. Because it is kind of funny, because really, there's no power in a curse spoken by a Christian, really. There isn't. I don't believe things like this are real, I don't believe this was a real man who cursed these children, and God caused something to happen so that the curse would be fulfilled. No. I mean, what's really striking about the passage is you could kind of understand it if it was God being offended because someone had blasphemed him or something like that, because we kind of know the way God is, right, in the Bible. We kind of know that. He doesn't like blasphemy, right? You shall not take the Lord's name in vain. But it's just a man who was called a name, and he didn't like it. He didn't like the fact that some boys called him Baldy. And he thought, in his petty way, that this was a sufficient reason for those boys to die. So he called down a curse upon them. Talk about an overreaction. Yeah? I work in a school, so I know what it's like for a young person to say something a bit nasty to you. To overhear somebody saying something that's not nice. It has never made me want that person to die, right? Because I don't have that frail an ego. I don't think that my personal worth hinges upon the opinions of others towards me, right? Not that Elisha necessarily thought that either, but it's just hot-headedness, pettiness, and abuse of power. Yeah? That's just what it is. It's got nothing to do with God being offended. I really want to emphasize that because I have read a Christian critique on this. Let me call it up actually. Yeah. In summary, 2 Kings 2 verses 23 to 24 is not an account of God mauling young children for making fun of a bald man. Rather, it is a record of an insulting demonstration against God's prophet by a large group of young men. Because these young men of about 20 years of age or older, and where are they getting that from, right? Brackets, the same term is used of Solomon in 1 Kings chapter 3 verse 7. So because the same word that is translated here as boys or youths, because it was used of Solomon when he was 20, then it must be that these guys were 20. You see the dishonest way that this is being interpreted? The word just means youths, right? Because these young people of about 20 years of age or older so despised the prophet of the Lord, Elisha called upon the Lord to deal with the rebels as he saw fit. The Lord's punishment was the mauling of 42 of them by 2 female bears. And get this, the penalty was clearly justified. For to ridicule Elisha was to ridicule the Lord himself. Really. Just for calling him bald. The seriousness of the crime was indicated by the seriousness of the punishment. The appalling judgment was God's warning to all who would scorn the prophets of the Lord. It's just some boys who called a man Baldy. That's all it is. That's all it says. This is hugely speculative interpretation. And there's other stuff in here about how the baldness wasn't regular baldness, but it was to do with, shaving your head was the mark of a prophet. But, so they were mocking him for being a prophet, not for being bald. We don't know that. It just says they called him bald. It also says, the original translation in the King James was, go on up, you bald head. But, go on up, you bald head. The person who wrote this article says that the go on up part is a reference to what happened to Elijah, who went up to heaven. But it's really not, because if you look at what it says, as he was walking, hang on. From there, Elisha went up to Bethel. Up to Bethel. As he was walking along the road, some youth came out of town and jeered at him. Go on up. Where? To Bethel. Obviously. If you were a bunch of boys and you knew that this prophet of the Lord had been carried up to heaven in a whirlwind, for real, right? If you knew that it had happened and you believed that it happened, would you say to this next guy, who's the next prophet, go on up, Baldy? You'd have to be insane to say that if you really believed that that other event had happened, right? So that interpretation makes absolutely no sense whatsoever. It just means go on up to Bethel. It's obvious. So you see the way that people will interpret this passage, instead of just taking it for what it plainly means. It's one man's petty judgment upon some loud-mouthed kids who didn't know who they were dealing with. And he decides to act and take extreme measures on them. That's just what it says. And it's so inconsistent, with even the other morality in the Old Testament where, it's eye for eye and tooth for tooth. In other words, the punishment should fit the crime, right? So, if somebody kills somebody, they should lose their life, okay, according to Old Testament ethics. But this idea that somebody says something nasty to you, does that give you the right to take their life? Apparently it does, if you're a prophet of the Lord. It's nuts. It's crazy. I think, the way that I don't remember reading this really when I was a Christian, but the way I probably would have looked at it, given that I remember how I thought at the time, was I would have thought, God has the right to kill those boys if he wants to, because we are all under condemnation because of original sin. Right? Because of our fallen nature. So if God chooses to spare us for another second, that's his mercy. But if he chooses not to, that's his prerogative if he wants to do that, because we deserve nothing from him. Everything that we get is mercy. That's how I would have looked at it. But that doesn't really explain this passage, because the passage explicitly says why the boys died. It was not because of the universal sinfulness of mankind. It was because they shot their mouth off. That's not a good enough reason to take a life, because you shoot your mouth off. So what do you do with this if you're a Christian? To me, this is evidence that this God is not real. It's obvious what this passage in the Bible is about. It's illustrating the fact that Elisha now had power, right? He was now going to fill the boots of Elijah. Maybe, how would a Christian also argue around this? Maybe you would try to put the blame squarely on Elisha and not involve God at all. After all, it was Elisha that called down the curse, right? So maybe he's to blame. Maybe it was wrong. It's Elisha's fault. He shouldn't have done it. But it's not God's fault. Now hold on a minute, if this is the way you're thinking, right? If a man prays or speaks a curse who is it that actually fulfills the curse? Is it the man? Is it the human being? No, because a human being is just a human being. We have no supernatural power, right? And if you take the Christian worldview, the only person who can actually respond to a prayer or a curse is God or Satan, right? So who is Elisha speaking to? Well, it clearly says, he turned around, looked at them, and called down a curse on them in the name of the Lord. Right? It's pretty clear who he's expecting to fulfill this. God. Right? So if two bears come out of the woods and maul 42 of the boys, that wasn't Elisha's doing. That was because God agreed with the curse that Elisha had called down upon the boys and fulfilled it. God did that because Elisha has no power. You get it? And just contrast this, if you're a Christian, just contrast this with the experience of God that you undoubtedly have, the experience of praying regularly to God. I'm guessing you probably know what it's like to feel like you're slamming your head against a wall as you pray daily for things and you watch nothing happen most of the time. And of course, by the law of averages, something happens once in a while, right? But you never quite get to say, if you're honest with yourself, you never quite get to say, that definitely happened because God is real and God made it happen. And I know there are some people who've had to pray and pour their heart out for things. Like maybe you have a child that has leukemia. So you're praying, please Lord, please heal my child. Make my child well. And God continues to just ignore you. Doesn't happen. Contrast that with what happened here in the Old Testament. Elisha calls a curse down. God is immediately, I'm on it. Bang! Kill those kids. They deserve to die. Time well spent. Oh, what's this? Someone wants someone to be healed? Just stop bothering me. That's not important to me. It's important to me that I kill these kids because they called my servant Baldy. Don't bother me with all these other things. My supernatural power has to be used for more important things like killing children. Have I gone too far? Well, look, that's what happened. This is your Bible. We live in a world where supernatural healings do not happen. And if we are to believe the Bible, apparently God does consider it a priority to kill children because they shoot their mouth off. So the question really that I have to ask any Christians who are listening to this is, because I'm not mad at God, right? I'm really not. I don't believe in him. The question I have to ask you is, can you believe in such a petty God? Could such a petty God be real? Because it is petty. I mean, you can see it. To kill a child because the child shoots their mouth off. It's just an overreaction. Hot-headedness. So if this happened, this is the God you believe in. Why? Why do you believe in this God? Maybe you didn't know about this. But now that you do, what are you going to do about it? Are you going to allow this to affect your view of God, your view of Christianity? Because remember, Christianity came out of all this. It may have been maybe over 1,000 years later, but Christianity came out of this. This is the same God. The Old Testament is still in your Bible. You can't just say, oh, that was the Old Covenant. That doesn't bother me. I'm now in the New Covenant. That's kind of like me saying, like imagine I had killed somebody 20 years ago, right? And I'd got away with it. But I'd only done it the once, and I'd felt really bad about it. And then now, 20 years later, someone finds out and evidence comes out that I had committed murder. If I said to the law, hold on a minute, that was 20 years ago, I'm a different person now. Do you think I still wouldn't have to pay a prison sentence? Of course I would. God is the same yesterday, today, and forever, according to the Bible. Who am I really talking to here? You see, I know that there are going to be people that I would call the true believers, right? The ones who are not really thinking, the ones who've decided already that Christianity is true, they've no doubt about it, and I'm the bad guy for drawing attention to all this stuff. So they'll be down, and they're the ones you'll maybe see down in the comments, just slagging me off. What a terrible person I am. Who am I to judge God and all this stuff? I'm not talking to those people. Those people have already lost their mind. I'm really speaking to the people who are on the fence. The people who are Christians but can see the cracks in it. And I'm just trying to widen those cracks a little. Because they can be widened, and they should be widened because the cracks are there. I'm just drawing attention to what's already there, yeah? And I'm trying to tell you that if you decide to abandon your faith, you have nothing to be scared of. Because the God of the Bible is a monster, and such a being could not be real. I can't believe that the universe is ruled by a human-like entity that is this petty.